All right, hello everyone. So far we've plowed through a lot of information about programming and JavaScript, and some of it's kind of mundane. Now we're going to start to move towards stuff that's a little more interesting and that we can really start to use to build useful programs. And we're going to talk about objects in JavaScript. So in the past we talked about how variables can store different types of data, and we talked about numbers, strings, and Boolean data types. Well, another data type is what we call the object data type. When we're writing programs, we often need to simulate real-world objects, and we keep track of data, and we make these models of real-world things. For example, we might need to create a program that keeps track of dogs. So we might create dog objects in our code, and a dog object should contain all the information about a dog that we need for the purposes of our program. So if our program needs to keep track of dog names and dog breeds, then each dog object that we create should contain the data that represents the dog's name and breed. As another example, let's say we need to keep track of books. Maybe we're building a program for a library. Well, every book has certain properties that we might want to keep track of in our program. Maybe the publisher, the title, the author, the number of pages. I mean, you could go on and come up with all sorts of different things about a book that you could potentially track in your program. So I guess my point is that objects are a collection of properties and their values. For example, a property of a book might be the author. So and the value of that property might be Ernest Hemingway or something like that. So for now, just remember that an object is a collection of properties and their values. So let's scroll on down the page here a little bit, and let's see what it's like to create an object in JavaScript. So let's copy this code sample here, and then we'll take it on over to Sublime Text. I got the wrong file open. Hang on a second. Okay, now I've got this file open, which is called JavaScript Objects.html, and we're going to scroll on down until we find our script tag that we've been using. Here it is on line 128, and I'm going to go ahead and paste in this code here. Now this is long. I might have to reformat this so you can see it all, but let's see if we can. Let's see here. So I don't know if you can see all of that, but what I've got here is a variable that I've called my dog, and it's not referring to a number or a string. The data type of the value that my dog is storing is an object. So there's a lot to cover here. Objects are enclosed in curly braces. So this is the beginning of the object, and this is the end of the object. And then inside of those curly braces, we have the properties and their values. And what sometimes we call those key value pairs or property value pairs. So the first property value pair is right here, and the name of the property is name, and the value of the property is Lilo. So that's my dog's name. You probably heard him barking earlier in one of the videos. So we've got this object has a name property, a breed property, an age property, and a vaccinated property. So the value of the name property is Lilo, his breed is Mutt, his age is 3, and he has been vaccinated. That's true. So we've got a couple of different data types here. We've got 2 strings for the name and breed, and we've got a number for the age, and we've got a Boolean stored for the vaccinated. So pay close attention to the syntax here. As I said, everything's enclosed in curly braces, and then after the property name comes a colon, and then after the colon comes the value. If it's a string, it's got to be in quotes. So this here makes up one property value pair, or we call them key value pairs. Key value pairs are separated by commas. So I've got a comma here, and then the next key value pair. So the next property value or key value, however you want to say it, the property is breed and its value is mutt. And then we move on to the next key value pair, and we've got age is the name of the property and the value is 3, so and so on. Objects can become pretty complicated, and we'll see that pretty soon here. We'll be dealing with some really complex objects pretty soon, and so they can take up a lot of space. So this is a really simple object. So if you're another way to write these objects out is to break each property value pair onto its own line. So I can hit return here, and I'll just reformat this in another way. Some programmers prefer this, and then I want to make sure that my curly braces line up so that my first line of my object is in line with the closing curly brace. That's the way I like to do it. So you might see objects written this way as well. Okay, so once we've got these objects created, what can we do with them and how do we interact with them? Well, let's go back over to the web page here, and I'll scroll on down to, now this is what I just showed you, basically a different way to format your syntax for your objects. And I'll go and grab this code sample right here, and I'm going to add it to what we already have. So I'm not going to delete the previous code sample. Alright, then I'm going to format it. So once you have an object, you can access its properties by what we call dot notation here. So I've got these console.logs, and if I want to access the dog's name, I put the variable name. So remember that this is the variable that's storing our object. It's my dog. And if I want to access the name property, I put dot name. Same for breed and age. Let me just save this and then pull it up in the browser here. I'm going to hit F12 to see the console logs, and when I refresh the page, you'll see that here are the properties getting logged to the console here. So we can use we call this the dot operator here. I guess we didn't talk about the dot operator when we talked about operators last time, but that's how you can access the properties of an object. So in this example, we're getting the properties and we're logging them out. But we can also change those properties too, and we can change the properties like this. I'm going to go back over to the web page, and I'm going to close the developer tools for now. We'll see that more later, and I'm going to go down to the next block of code here and copy that, and then I'm just going to paste it right underneath the previous code here, and then do some formatting. So in these 4 lines of code, I'm changing each one of the properties. So my dog originally started out with the name of Lilo, but this line of code is changing the name to Buster. So we can use the dot operator not only to fetch the properties, so we can log them and compare them and do other things with them, but we can also use the dot operator to change the properties of an object. So once again, it goes the variable name, my dog, that's the variable that's storing this object, then the dot, and then the property that we want to change. And then we use the assignment operator and we assign it a new value here. And so you can see how we're doing that for the other properties as well. So when we use the dot operator, we say that we're using dot notation. There is an alternative syntax to do this, and of course there's more than one way to do everything in programming, and it makes it confusing, but I got to show it to you because you're going to see it. So there's another way to, other than using the dot operator, to get and set properties of an object. Let's go back to the web page and scroll on down to the next code example, and we'll copy that. Go back over to Sublime Text, and I'm going to hit return a few times here and just paste that right in there, do some formatting. So this is what we call bracket notation. The other thing was dot notation, but what you can do is you can use these square brackets. So you have the variable name and then you have a pair of square brackets. So here's the here's the opening square bracket and then the closing square bracket, and then now you have to put the property name inside of quotes here, and I'll try and explain that in just a minute here. But if I log this out, we'd see that this line of code changes my dog's age to 10, and then we console.log it using bracket notation instead of dot notation. So why do we have to put quotes inside of here? That seems a little bit confusing. And again, you could use either double quotes or single quotes, but they have to be the same on both sides. So this gets down to the difference between dot notation and bracket notation. Now in dot notation, this is referring to a property by its name. But in brackets, what actually goes inside of the brackets here is an expression that gets evaluated. So let me give you an example here. Let's go back to the web page and let's copy the next code example here. I'm not going to take the comments, I'm just going to copy the code itself. So let's copy this and go back over to Sublime Text and paste that code in here and do some formatting. Okay, so in this line of code here, we're flashing up a prompt and we're saying, which property of my dog would you like to look up? So whatever the user enters is going to get stored in X here. And then look at, we're using bracket notation here, and so like I said, this is an expression that will be evaluated. So a variable all by itself is technically an expression because we can evaluate it by figuring out what its value is. So the value of X here is going to be whatever the user enters into the prompt box. So that is the difference between dot notation and bracket notation, is that in bracket notation what goes inside the brackets is an expression that can be evaluated. And if we're not putting an expression in there, then we need to use the quotes. So what this would, if I put quotes around this right here, then JavaScript would be looking for a property named X. Well, there is no property named X in my dog object, so we might get something that we didn't expect when we do this console.log. Anyways, I'm going to remove those quotes, and then let's go ahead and run this code here. So I'll save it, go back to the browser. I'm going to pull up the developer tools by pressing F12, and then I'm going to hit refresh here, and it's going to say which property of my dog would you like to look up, and I'll enter a name and hit OK, and then let's see what happens in the log. So there it's showing that the dog's name is Buster, and now remember it started out as Lilo, but we changed it to Buster. Okay, so you might be wondering what happens if I entered something that wasn't one of the properties of my object. Well, I'll let you play around with that and you can see what you get in the console when you do that. I'll close the developer tools here, and now a common mistake that beginners make is they'll forget, if they're using bracket notation, they'll forget that it's an expression that needs to get evaluated. And let's say in this example here, we're trying to access the breed property of my dog, and I forget to use quotes. Well, JavaScript is going to think that breed is some variable that I've declared somewhere, and I haven't declared a variable called breed. But there is a property named breed inside of my dog variable, but I haven't created a variable called breed anywhere. So in this case, this is wrong, and in order to do this properly, I'd have to make sure that I put the quotes around the property name. So otherwise, it'll evaluate this and it'll think it's a variable that is storing a value, but there is no variable that we created called breed. All right, so that was a relatively short video, but important and still lots of information. So we're getting through some of the, we're getting to some of the more important, not more important because what we've studied is important too, but we're moving towards what our goal is really in this entire program here at Western, and that is to work with programs that can manipulate and report data. So with these objects that we create for our programs, they store data. They store data about things that we want to write programs about. So we will use objects a lot, and for the purpose of keeping track of data. So you probably already picked up on this, but that dog object that we worked with encapsulates all the properties of a dog. So we can fetch the values of a dog, and we can set the values of the dog, and pretty soon we'll learn how to do other kind of operations on objects for the purposes of processing data, which is what programmers' primary objective usually is. All right.